folks, and welcome to The Farm, a podcast dedicated to culture, parapolitics, and high weirdness in all its many forms. This is your host, Recluse, aka Steven Snyder, the longtime curator of the Visa blog and author of a special relationship, Trump, Epstein, and the Secret History of the Anglo-American Establishment. If you like what you hear here today, be sure to check me out at visupview.blogspot.com. That's VISUPVIEW, all one word, at blogspot.com, and pick your copy of that book and my other works at the Farm's official store, which is The Farm Podcast, all one word, The Farm Podcast.store. And please consider signing up for the Farm's Patreon. At the lowest tier, you get 2 additional full-length shows per month. That's between 3 and 4 hours of bonus material with exclusive guests and content. All access Patreons, you get a one monthly Zoom party with Recluse with exclusive presentations on all kinds of incredible topics. Got a big one coming up that is going to totally blow the door off of the origins of the Wandering Bishops, bring in Renaissance and a whole bunch of other crazy stuff from Paris and a lot of the other occult stuff that was going on in France during the late 19th century, including the first modern satanic panic, in addition to all kinds of briefly State of the Union stuff with reports on my recent investigations and all kinds of other goodies. Really, guys, you don't want to miss out, in addition to getting all those bonus episodes. But anyway, we've got 2 guests for this outing. One of them is a repeater, or actually, I guess they were both now repeaters for that matter. All right, so first up is a college professor, mixed martial artist, and contributor to such publications as Center for Research on Globalization, Op-Ed News, Intrepid Report, Dissident Voice, among others. He is also the author of the fabulous School World Order, which I highly recommend. Folks, I give you guys the great John Klyczek. Take it for last name right. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's Klyczek. It's all good. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Yes, absolutely. Gosh, that was one of my notes of stuff to do. Sorry about that, man. All right. Also joining us is my favorite repeater, John Brisson of We've Read the Documents. John, thank you so much for joining us tonight, sir.
Always glad to be here. It's also good to be here with a fellow John.
Well, I was going to say though,
there's 2 Johns.
I was going to say here for the sake of clarification, Brisson, you were going to be John, and the other one you were going to be Jake. Actually, such normally I call you anyways, Jake. So I'll help clarify that for the kids at home here. All right, so Brisson is John, and our other guest here is Jake. All right, so here we go. And I am super excited for this show, guys. I've got 2 of the best researchers active today in the house with me, and we're going to revisit a topic we've already explored in the farm last year, but we've got some new stuff. That is Barbara Marx Hubbard. John was there for that one, but he's uncovered some interesting new leads on the first woman of the New Age, and it relates to the Finders, among others. He's going to share some of that on that end. And so Jake, who, as I said before, is Jake. He's going to be looking at Hubbard as well. He's done a lot of work on this material. It's the first time it's going to appear on the farm. And from that, we're going to cover Teilhard de Chardin, Buckminster Fuller, the World Business Academy, the Institute of Noetic Science, and a lot of other topics. Who knows? Maybe I can give you guys a sneak peek in some of my own Hubbard material for my forthcoming book. This show is going to be epic. The stage is set. All right, Jake, we're going to start with you. Give us a little bit of the ideology that shaped Barbara Marx Hubbard. Tell us about Pierre Teilhard de Chardin.
Yeah, so that's one of her main inspirations. They didn't actually personally know each other, but in pretty much every speech I've ever watched of hers, which is pretty much everyone that I could find, and in pretty much every book I've ever read of hers, I think I got 8 or 9 of them. There's more than that. She always tips the hat to Teilhard de Chardin. And so his influence upon her largely has to do with his concept of the noosphere and how it relates to what Hubbard calls conscious evolution, and then how that relates to transhumanism, which for those who don't know, Barbara Marx Hubbard was a transhumanist explicitly. So who was de Chardin? Well, he was a Jesuit priest, and he was also a eugenicist. A lot of his writings promote eugenics. And, as your audience probably is aware, eugenics is the precursor to transhumanism. So where eugenics basically tries to control evolution through biological selection, transhumanism is basically eugenics 2.0. It was started by the term was coined by Julian Huxley, who himself was the president of the British Eugenics Society, and in his 57, 58 book, it's titled "New Bottles for New Wine." Julian Huxley basically says, well, we can still do the old school biological selection, the selective breeding and negative eugenics through sterilization, euthanasia, abortion, etc. But he says, actually, the main driver of evolution is, he says, quote, ideas and machines. And so, moving into the 21st century, machines are now digital. And by that, we mean computers. So we mean merging biology with the digital computer through stuff like Elon Musk's brain computer interfaces. And so that's sort of, already gives you sort of a window into how Teilhard de Chardin's, his eugenicist ideas are going to sort of dovetail with his concept of the noosphere, and how that's going to inspire Hubbard's idea about conscious evolution, and also how it relates to her ideas about transhumanism. So what exactly is the noosphere? The noosphere, it comes from the term nous, and that was it was a concept from the pre-Socratic philosopher Anaxagoras. Basically, it refers to the mind of the universe, or the mind of God. Okay, and according to Teilhard de Chardin, the nous, or the intelligence of the universe, that it is the main driver of evolution. And so at some point through the evolution of the Big Bang and matter and energy, this cosmic force sort of expresses intelligence through the human mind. And now the human mind is sort of the agent of the universe, and it's through the human mind and through the human intellect that we can develop technology. So technology is basically the material manifestation of the apex of human intelligence, right? So you can sort of, by a transitive property, right, if the noosphere is intelligence, and intelligence is expressed through technology, and thereby technological evolution equals the evolution of intelligence, which equals the evolution of the noosphere. Okay, and so in other words, if human evolution is going to be controlled through technology by means of transhumanist evolution, then there you have sort of where noospheric evolution or noetic evolution and transhuman evolution are basically the same thing, or they're on the same spectrum. And so, just to provide a little quote here from Hubbard on her ideas about transhumanism, there's a piece she wrote in 2008. It's titled "An Evolutionary Synthesis, a New Worldview Weaving Together a New Mimetic Code for the Optimum Future for Humanity." And in this, she forecasts how, quote, "From the perspective of the evolutionary transhumanism, we see a possible convergence of our expanded consciousness with our technologically enhanced body/minds as the next stage of our evolution. So this is her idea about conscious evolution, which is basically technological evolution, which is noetic evolution. And there's other transhumanist quotes in that piece. I find it interesting that she sort of foreshadows the new normal. In one of the quotes, she says, in evolutionary transhumanism, the universal human, that's her idea of how what we will become post Homo sapien, will be the Homo universalis. She says, quote, that Homo universalis appears for the first time on this earth as a new norm, as a person incarnating our spiritual, social, and scientific/technological capacity. So that's sort of how Teilhard de Chardin shapes her concept of conscious evolution.
Thank you, Jake. That was very well said. And, I think it's really important too, that de Chardin is invoked as much as possible when discussing these topics, because there really is a cult around de Chardin in a lot of these circles. I mean, it was kind of like the same thing, with a lot of the remote viewing experiments at SRI and so forth. And the whole concept of the noonosphere was very important in ways I think that people don't really get, that I will explore in my book. But it relates to the very similar ideologies the Russian cosmists had, who de Chardin was also in contact with, another element of all this that's often overlooked. But anyway, how about Buckminster Fuller, Jake? How about him? What was his influence on Hubbard?
So he is another one of her inspirations. He is actually, we can call him her mentor proper, in the sense that they did know each other. And in several of her books, but just, to cite one in particular, in her 2015 book, The Evolutionary Testament of Co-Creation, The Promise Will Be Kept, she recorded how Fuller declared, quote, "There is no doubt in my mind that Barbara Marx Hubbard, who helped introduce the concept of futurism to society, is the best informed human now alive regarding futurism and the foresights it has produced." So basically, he largely saw her, not just as the spokesperson for conscious evolution and futurism, but basically his heir to what he called the design science revolution. Now, the design science revolution was sort of his theory about how to harness industrial engineering in order to steer technological evolution towards a quote unquote utopia. And so again, this sort of brings us back to this idea of conscious evolution merging with technological evolution towards transhumanism. And interestingly, in one of his books, it's titled Synergetics, Exploration in the Geometry of Thinking, Fuller pontificated that, quote, "the universe is technology." So again, right, we sort of have this equivocation between consciousness, technology, and the universe itself, right? And so sort of conflating those three together, we get transhumanist evolution through conscious evolution through technological evolution. And one of the terms that he used and that Barbara Marx Hubbard used to as a driver for this idea about conscious evolution was this concept of quote unquote Christ consciousness. And Hubbard and Fuller both had what they called Christ consciousness experiences. And there's a quote. So she at a speech she gave, I think it was at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. It might have been a different one. The precise citation is in my article on Hubbard. You can get it at Unlimited Hangout. But the quote is, this is Hubbard telling the story that Fuller had this experience where he communicated with some sort of entity who says, quote, "Bucky, you are the first mini Christ on earth, and what you attest to is true." So what he attests to being his whole idea about design science revolution. And then she says that he shared this story, he being Fuller shared the story with her being Hubbard. And she said that after he told her this, she, quote, "put his temple onto mine, and I feel he zapped me with the design science revolution." So, she was not an engineer like he was, but I'm, in the sense of at least the ideology behind the design science revolution and how it could be a driver for transhumanist evolution. As a side note, it is interesting to note, I was digging through the old Club of Rome Limits to Growth document recently, and he's actually cited in there as one of the sources to sort of promote the idea of what becomes the concept of sustainable development. And that's, to me, important, because if you also look at the rest of the citations in there, there's a lot of references to Malthusian population control agencies, including the Population Reference Bureau, people like Frank Notestein, who was part of the Population Council. And Frank Notestein himself was a eugenicist. So, there's this sort of this overlap between, sustainable development, Malthusian population control, and basically eugenics. And for people that don't know, it's actually, Darwin's ideas came out of his study of Malthus. Basically, the idea of natural selection, sort of the survival of the fittest, that's Herbert Spencer, but, we attribute it as Darwinism, that survival and natural selection occurs because, as according to Malthus, there's a limited number of resources on the planet, and therefore species have to compete over it. And it's through that competition among the population for the limited resources that, one dominates and then therefore evolves. So there's, again, sort of a pretty clear thread between, Malthusianism, eugenics, sustainable development, the design science revolution, and transhumanist evolution.
Hey, Recluse, can I mention something real quick about Buckminster Fuller?
Oh, go for it, John.
He was also a member of Bar Marx Hubbard's, Ed Recordis's World Future Society. But it was interesting enough that Jake had mentioned that Bar Marx Hubbard also had a very similar experience with what a lot of the theosophists call the ascended masters, very much akin to Buckminster Fuller. They both would describe it as.
It actually, Victor Hugo had a really similar experience too in the mid-19th century when he was in exile. I think he had like some kind of holy experience where Jesus, I believe, had told him that he was going to help lead to the overthrow of Napoleon III in 1853 or 1854 or something like that. Obviously, it didn't come to pass. So this kind of thing it's not unprecedented. This kind of plays into what the great Keith Allen Dennis, my research partner, likes to say when one has stuck their own head so far up their own ass that they have seen God. I kind of think that's what this falls under.
Yeah, and one of the biggest people that she also had a friendly relationship to and looked towards as well was Jonas Salk. She left her husband to be with Jonas Salk. They just have this weird relationship with each other, because I think she discovered his writings, I want to say 1964 or 65, somewhere around there. And then she started corresponding with Salk. And at first she'd reached out to Gary Peele, who's a publisher of Scientific American, and then Peele would send her letters to Salk. So Salk wrote back to her and said, "Oh, we're two, genetic peas in this same pod." And then so she, he comes, takes her, she leaves her husband. And then, pretty much, he like Salk goes to her house, right? And he's like looking around and he's like, this is like the Garden of Eden, and then Bar Marx Hubbard's like, yes, I'm Eve and I'm leaving. So she abandons her husband and her children because, she's such a great love and light person, right? And then, for her visions of the future. And Jonas Salk would actually quote and say that Bar Marx Hubbard did more to advance his beliefs and his work more than he ever could have done. So again, that's just another tie-in that's extremely interesting with the Jonas Salk and study of vaccinations and formation of the Jonas Salk Institute for Biological Studies, and just kind of with everything that's gone on with COVID-19 and vaccines and everything, and Salk being a virologist and one of the developers of the early successful polio vaccination. It's just interesting that Bar Marx Hubbard, even though Salk is credited with saving so many lives, preventing polio, he says Hubbard did more for humanity than he ever did and pushed his work more than he ever did. So what does that tell you about Salk? What does that tell you about all Salk's work? Was it as good for humanity as everybody thinks that it is?
Yeah, well, I didn't touch on Salk in my article because I'm breaking it up into a series. And the next piece that I'm going to do, I'm going to focus on sort of the Malthusian angle and the eugenic angle in terms of Hubbard's, the ideas she promoted and also some of her connections. And Jonas Salk, I saved him for this one because he wrote a book called Survival of the Wisest, which, just listen to the title, right? But if you pull out quotes from it, they're basically, he's promoting, Malthusian population control that would be managed by the wisest, which are to him, those who are, genetically superior. So it's basically a eugenic management system. And then a friend of mine sent me a link to, it's at archive.org. This was recorded in 1975. This is Jonas Salk, Conscious Evolution and the Evolution of Consciousness, Summer Conference, 1975 at New York. It says a Lindisfarne talk. So there's Salk and other people in there, obviously talking about conscious evolution and, basically how institutions, businesses, governments, scientists, academics, how they can sort of work together to drive conscious evolution. But I'm going to paraphrase this, but it's almost a direct quote, and it's in this audio that I'll send y'all. Basically, there's kind of pro and con side, or what they called, I think, optimist and pessimist. And on the pessimist side was this guy, and I don't remember who it was, but he says in there he's worried that that through the merger of corporations and government, that the military industrial complex could be hijacked, and by means of artificial crisis creation, there could be a perpetual emergency government that would result in some sort of a totalitarian system, driven by these principles of basically, conscious evolution, which we've, shown is basically a Malthusian eugenic, outgrowth.
Yes.
And that's exactly what's happening, right? He literally says artificial crisis creation and a perpetual emergency government, and this is 1975. And I just, I laughed out loud because, obviously we get called conspiracy theorists for using those phrases, but apparently, intellectuals, almost 50 years ago thought the same thing before, the planet was locked down for, a year, 2 years. So
Jake, to kind of get back on the backdrop here a little bit, before we get into some of this other stuff, let's talk about Abraham Maslow for a moment. So can you give the kids at home a rundown about who he was and how he helped shape Hubbard?
Yeah, he's another one of her mentors proper, meaning they knew each other. I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, in one of the books, I think it's in her biography, which is called The Hunger of Eve, that she was with him on his deathbed. They were that close. And so, who was Maslow, before we sort of talk about how he influenced her. So, Maslow was basically the father of humanistic psychology. And he basically calls it the third force of psychology, which he says is an evolution and a combination of the first and second forces of psychology, which are psychoanalytic and behavioral psychology. So prior to him and his idea about humanistic psychology, all psychology was broken down into this psychology of the subconscious through Freud's theories on psychoanalysis, and then the behaviorist psychologists who basically boiled everything down to stimulus response, how behaviors and thoughts are conditioned by environmental stimuli. What these both had in common, although they were, obviously very different in approach, was they largely focused on pathologizing psychology. So they both focused heavily, if not entirely, on finding problems that of the psyche that needed to be fixed. So in psychoanalysis, right, you have to find out what is your id suppressing, or what is being suppressed within your id, and how to sort of express that, or to resolve the conflict between the id and the ego. And in the behavioral psychology, the idea is what sort of stimuli are causing people to have bad behaviors or bad thoughts. So people like B.F. Skinner basically thought that he's wrote a book called Beyond Good and Evil, or Beyond Freedom and Dignity. I'm sorry. But his idea was that, there is no such thing as good and evil. There's no such thing as freedom and dignity. There's only responses to behaviors, and anything that you do that you could categorize as morally wrong or otherwise bad it's only the result of bad stimuli. It's not the fault of the responder. Maslow thought that basically this is, that we needed what he called a positive psychology. So his humanistic psychology is a positive psychology, and basically it's sort of a psychological movement, ways that sort of sets up psychological paradigms that are proactive, right? Like what sort of psychology would help with what he called self-actualization or peak states. And so the idea was, and they encompass a little bit of behaviorism and psychoanalysis, but they also utilize what he said would become the fourth force, and that's what he called transpersonal psychology. And if you read I think it's the preface or the foreword to Beyond Psychology of Being, the second edition, he literally refers to his transpersonal psychology as transhuman psychology. And this concept to him was admittedly inspired by Nietzsche, right, and Nietzschean philosophy, right, and his idea of sort of the expression or the attainment of the Superman, which obviously inspired Nazi eugenics, and which again is the precursor to transhumanism. So out of this positive human psychology that's geared towards helping people achieve self-actualization and peak states, you get something called the human potential movement. Okay, and this is where Hubbard sort of takes the mantle of Maslow's psychological theories. So Maslow had something called the Eucychian network, and Hubbard was part of that network. But also in that network was the Esalen Institute. And at Esalen, you had people again like Maslow himself, but then you had Fuller again. You had Aldous Huxley, who actually coins the term human potential movement, basically building on Maslow's humanistic psychology. Aldous Huxley being the brother of his Julian Huxley, who, as I mentioned, was the guy that coined the term transhumanism. Another key figure at Esalen is Deepak Chopra. Okay, and Chopra himself said that Hubbard was, quote, the voice for conscious evolution of our time. Okay, and so all these folks are at Esalen, which is part of this Eucychian network, which pushed the human potential movement. And there's other human potential institutions and organizations in this Eucychian network that I cite in my article. And at Esalen, not only were they pushing the human potential movement, but if you read some of what's the publication of the World Transhumanist Society, it's H+ or Humanity Plus, and they have articles in there where they basically say that the human potential movement through Esalen was in fact the precursor to transhumanism. And in 2022, it may have already happened, it may still be yet to happen. There is or was a conference at Esalen titled Superhuman Evolution, which was to explore, quote, evolutionary esotericism. So here we are combining, the occult or the esoteric again with transhumanist evolution. And it said that this workshop would examine, quote, technology, psychedelics, Darwinian transformations, and metaphysical revelation that might point to or even manifest the future human or superhuman. So again, the Nietzschean concept. And then, there's also been workshops at Esalen by a guy named Mikey Siegel. He worked for NASA and Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And at one of his workshops, he was promoting this idea or this method of quote unquote hacking consciousness through biofeedback wearables, in particular through this thing called HeartSync, which is very similar to something that Hubbard developed, that Hubbard promoted, called HeartMath. But I'll hold off on that and sort of pause here. But sort of to recap everything, Maslow's humanistic / transpersonal / transhumanist psychology was picked up by Hubbard through the human potential movement and was driven through this Eucychian network, which included places like Esalen, And actually, one of her books is Conscious Evolution, Harnessing the Potential of our Social Potential, or something like that. But she basically often played on the idea of human potential movement with what she would call the social potential movement. And that's sort of the collectivization of human potential psychology through, collective technologies, as we've demonstrated through, internet and, ubiquitous screens, et cetera.
Where does Lawrence Rockefeller fit into all of this? Obviously, he was pivotal in the broader New Age movement, but what about in regards to Hubbard specifically?
Okay, so Hubbard acknowledges Rockefeller's support in almost every book that I've read that she published. So between 1998 and 2015 are the dates that I have for the books where I found acknowledgments of Rockefeller's support. So that's basically, for 24 years, she was basically praising Rockefeller's financial support, which would suggest that, it wasn't just a one-time deal early on. It suggests that he was continually funding her for those 24 years. In particular, he funded her Foundation for Conscious Evolution. And I believe it was the seed funding. In other words, I believe that, that he provided the early financing, the beginning funds for the foundation before it was even set up. Like he seed funded it, if my memory serves me correctly. And so what is the Foundation for Conscious Evolution? So it advances quote unquote synergistic, and that's a Buckminster Fuller term, by the way. He coins that term. Transhuman evolution, driven by, quote, the advent of radical evolutionary technologies such as biotechnology, nanotechnology, quantum computing, space exploration, etc. The tools are there to transform ourselves, our bodies, and our world. We can and are actually moving beyond the creature human condition toward a new species, a universal humanity capable of co-evolving with nature. So basically, what that quote is saying is that the Foundation for Conscious Evolution is basically sort of a nonprofit think tank that's disseminating the idea of transhumanist evolution through all these technologies that I just mentioned. Okay, but so not only did Lawrence Rockefeller finance this Foundation for Conscious Evolution, he also was at a philanthropy called, it's actually a venture capitalist firm called Venrock. It used to be called the Rockefeller Brothers Fund Inc. And it's actually, it's him along with, I think it's his three other brothers. There's Winthrop, Nelson, John D. III, and I think that's it. There might be another one I'm forgetting. But at Venrock, which is, this venture capitalist firm where Lawrence Rockefeller is one of the trustees, they finance the actual technologies that Hubbard is promoting ideologically through a Foundation of Conscious Evolution. So Venrock has financed biotech corporations, biopharmaceutical enterprises, gene sequencing companies, and genetic modification businesses, including Abbott Laboratories, Unity Biotechnology, Element Biosciences, Regenx Bio, 10x Genomics, Targeted Genetics, the Genetics Institute, Centocor, which is owned by Johnson & Johnson, AdNexus Therapeutics, which is owned by Bristol Myers Squibb, IDUN, which IDUN Pharmaceuticals, which is owned by Pfizer, and Sirna Therapeutics, spelled SIRNA, which is a, quote, RNA interference technology startup that was acquired by Merck. So, funding all this biotech that is basically owned by all these big pharma corporations, some of which have been involved in the development of, the mRNA and also the viral vector COVID jabs. Also, he at Venrock financed quantum computing companies, including Atom Computing and nanotech corporations such as NanoSys. All right, so he's financing, all of her conscious evolutionary ideas through her Foundation of Conscious Evolution, at the same time financing the actual technologies that will be needed and served by those ideologies. And one more interesting little note is that he funded the Gnostic writings of a guy by the name of Roger Weir. And in Hubbard's The Revelation, the subtitle is The Book of Co-Creation, Our Crisis is a Birth. In there, she refers to Weir as, quote, the teacher of it all. So there's another little overlap there between Hubbard, this Roger Weir guy, and Rockefeller.
So how does Hubbard fit in with the World Business Academy?
Okay, yeah. So what is the World Business Academy? Like, it's basically a think tank for promoting corporate globalization aimed at, quote unquote, shifting the consciousness of, quote, business leadership, young people, and the public at large. Okay, so basically you can think of it as sort of a corporate globalist think tank that can drive sort of the corporate mechanisms behind all of the technologies I just mentioned, and sort of this shifting consciousness. In other words, the new age ideology that sort of is the undergird for all the transhumanist technology. So Hubbard was a fellow at the World Business Academy, and also at other fellows at the World Business Academy were Deepak Chopra and Irvin Laszlo, and Hubbard frequently praised Irvin Laszlo. He might have even been at Esalen, if my memory serves me correctly. And I think, well, I know there's other people that Hubbard was chummy with, and some of them even might have been promoted in her Birth 2012 and beyond as what she called, quote unquote, allies of the quote unquote Shift Network, which is part of this Birth 2012 campaign. So this idea of, again, shifting consciousness. One of them might be Jean Houston. That might not be precise, but you can, the citation would be in my article. The founder of the World Business Academy is Willis Harman, and Willis Harman was promoted by Hubbard in several publications. And Harman, he was also promoted by Maslow. He was part of the Eucychian network, and he actually set up something called the Education for the Future Project at Stanford Research Institute, which Recluse, you mentioned earlier. And this is not just this place where I'm sorry, you mentioned Princeton, I think, and I might be conflating the two, but Stanford Research Institute is also where ARPANET was launched. Okay, so this idea of conscious evolution through the internet and through sort of the World Business Academy pushing this idea of conscious evolution and sort of getting corporations behind that idea. At the same time, the guy who set up the WBA is at the place where the internet sort of was born, and sort of the internet being the high-tech platform to sort of be the vehicle for transhumanist evolution. And one more thing we should note is that Willis Harman was actually also a president of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which I can expand on if you want.
Yeah, sure. Go for it with the Institute of Noetic Sciences.
Okay, cool. So it's basically kind of like a new age sort of nonprofit corporation that promotes this, again, Teilhard de Chardin's idea about noetic or noospheric evolution. Okay. Hubbard has given several speeches at, the acronym for it is IONS or IONS. So I might say IONS for short here instead of Institute for Noetic Sciences. But in Birth 2012 and beyond, IONS is listed as one of Hubbard's Shift Network allies, along with Esalen. Esalen is also listed. Okay, so you're seeing how all these institutions that she was connected to are also connected with each other, which obviously illustrates, a coordinated network of institutions, all promoting this idea of conscious evolution, transhumanist evolution, and largely using sort of corporate infrastructure as one of the vehicles. Mikey Siegel, who I mentioned earlier, he's the guy at Esalen who did the workshop on hacking consciousness. He has served as an advisor to the Institute of Noetic Sciences Innovation Lab. And then IONS is also connected to Lawrence Rockefeller, because Rockefeller financed the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Program, PAIR, and I think this is what you were referring to about the remote viewing stuff, or at least was connected to it. It was looking into,
You mean the SRI stuff?
No, I was referring to Princeton, it's also known as PAIR, that they did research on remote viewing and that type of stuff. So maybe I mixed them together. But that's largely what they were doing research on, was sort of, ESP, remote viewing, stuff like that, psychokinesis, etc. And out of this Princeton Engineering Anomalies research program was launched something called the Global Consciousness Project. And the Global Consciousness Project is a satellite of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, right? So, the same pair program that Rockefeller was financing is basically connected to ions, okay? And then there's several members of the Institute of Noetic Sciences who are also part of the HeartMath's Global Coherence Initiative, and HeartMath was promoted by Hubbard in her Birth 2012 and Beyond, also in her Conscious Evolution.
Hey, Jay, can I say something about the Institute of Noetic Sciences real quick?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So the Institute of Noetic Sciences, it was founded by the astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who has a good relationship with Barbara Marx Hubbard, and is a New Ager himself. And also the investor was Paul Nathaniel Temple Jr. Now, Paul Nathaniel Temple Jr. was a major financier in the inner circle of the family and the fellowship. He was really good friends with Abraham Variety, the founder of the family and the fellowship. So and there's a lot of secret right or hidden right funding that went into the Institute of Noetic Sciences. So you would ask yourself, okay, so why are these conservative, call themselves Christian organizations funding like this major New Age think tank? Another connection to that would be the funding that came. You mentioned the funding that came from the Rockefellers. There's also funding that came from the Templeton Foundation, and so John M. Templeton Jr. It was John Templeton.
Yeah, he was a big CMP guy.
Senior was the founder of the Templeton Foundation, but his son was on the board of governors of the Council for National Policy and was the chairman and president of the Templeton Foundation. Templeton Foundation has also funded the Cato Institute, Freedom's Watch, American Enterprise Institute, Alice Economic Research Foundation, the Manhattan Institute, McLaughlin Group. I used to watch McLaughlin Group with my grandfather growing up. I remember the McLaughlin Group has been sponsored and funded by the Templeton Foundation.
Well,
Milton
another
Friedman
thing
and
about
Walter
the
E.
Templeton
Williams.
Foundation too is they're actually major sponsors of the gifted programs and a lot of the research. And
yeah, they're in my book. I mentioned them. They funded basically a lot of the ed tech stuff. The particulars escape me right now because it's been a while, but they're in my book, School World Order, as well. Yeah.
And the biggest thing that I remember the Institute of Noetic Sciences from was Dan Brown's third book, The Lost Symbol, in which Institute of Noetic Sciences, or Noetic Sciences in general, is brought up in that book, but they're painted as good in good light, as well as the Freemasons in The Lost Symbol. So it is what it is.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah.
But there's a lot of secret right influence that's got into the Institute of Noetic Sciences. I've been researching them for a while, just because when I came across that,
a really incredible connection to Billy Graham too. But that's for Dr. Future to tell people about.
And then you're right. They also did the Global Consciousness Project, but they also had people import their 23andMe data to see if they have any psi genes or psychic genes, which
they've actually been really big at looking at the genetic possibilities, which again is, interesting in light of the Templeton Foundation funding that, and also like a lot of the gifted programs.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say about I haven't looked at it in a while, so I don't like to say stuff that's not fresh in my head, on record. But yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was remembering was John Templeton funding some sort of gene data mining or some ed tech program that was grounded in some sort of genetic basis.
Yeah, and then they also of course you had the Scientologist Jim Marrs writing a book, Size Spies, about psychic spies and psychic genes, and also pushing a lot of noetic sciences type information throughout his whole journalistic careers, and also being an author. So it's interesting. I mean, they push new age mental health potentiality, virtual reality experiments. You have the transhumanists. Right now, Peter Thiel's funding a lot of the ketamine clinics and the MDMA clinics that you're seeing that's popped up, psilocybin microdosing that's popped up across the country to quote unquote cure PTSD and depression. And they're even talking about blending in sensory deprivation chambers where you put in kind of like feedback suits on, kind of like a Ready Player One while you're in a K-hole, and you'll be able to live 30 years in a span of about an hour. So I mean, they're all looking into this stuff together. MAPS Institute is feeding off of Institute of Noetic Sciences, and back and forth being funded by these secret right groups that are considered to be part of the right part of the world order, which you would think they wouldn't be funding something like this, because you would think this is more of something that would be progressive ideology or something that would be communist ideology, but it's not even
so
it's not even the case. I mean, we've had many discussions, Recluse, about one bird, two wings, or fascism and communism blending together over time. So in reality, it's not surprising that these people would fund these really damaging and insane methods that can harm a lot of people. They think that they're doing good by love and light, but they're actually harming a lot of people, in my opinion. So
I pulled up just because I decided I wanted to pull this up. So I opened up my book, and so John Templeton Foundation funded, quote, voluntary family planning, genetics, exceptional cognitive talent and genius. They also financed Duckworth is her last name. I can't. Her first name escapes me. But she pushed this idea.
Tammy Duckworth,
Angela.
Yeah, wasn't she
Angela,
genetic stuff or something like that for?
Yeah, she was promoting. So really, it was, in academia, they really emphasized that she was promoting what's called socio-emotional learning. And she came up with these categories or these metrics for, does the student have, strong socio-emotional learning proclivities. And so like one of the concepts she has is grit, like she's trying to quantify the emotional part of learning that sort of drives you to apply the cognitive part. But what people don't know is when she gave the TED talk for this idea, the TED talk starts off with Francis Galton up on the screen, and sort of tracing the roots of her research back to Galton. And actually, if you look at the white paper she wrote for this, that was the basis for that speech, it does emphasize these emotional metrics, what they call SEL metrics, SEL metrics. But half of the paper is actually about IQ, right? And genetic IQ. And it's sort of for her, it's like a dialectic of IQ and, socio-emotional metrics. In other words, right, your socio-emotional metrics only go so far because your genetics sort of, cap you at how far you can go with your socio-emotional or your cognitive abilities. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it definitely, that's one of the things about Templeton and why it really stood out to me, because it seemed like it was really interested in a lot of this stuff at a genetic level. I mean, specifically, not just, the fact that it was looking at a lot of gifted kids, but also potentially maybe even genetic factors behind them. And then conversely, you also see it sort of like funding a lot of this sort of new agey stuff too, where some of the trends, some of the thoughts, and when it comes to people that are usually referred to as quote unquote experiencers, not just people who've seen, obviously psychic ability, but just ongoing paranormal phenomenon, other kinds of high strangeness that have been in, families for multiple generations. And there's a thought that this is also connected at a genetic level as well. So it's fascinating that Templeton Foundation does seem to have this almost like kind of arcane concepts of these extraordinary individuals produced genetically that they're searching for in an odd way. I mean, this has always been sort of connected, if you want to go way back again with Stanford. It's kind of an interesting thing that's not really very well known, but the psychology program that Lewis Terman came out of. Lewis Terman, of course, was the principal architect of what we would think of now as the gifted program. Really interesting guy. I did a Patreon show on him, gifted program history, where we got into that a bit, but there's a lot to him that I'm still going to explore in a future installment. But regardless, anyway, he got started working out at Stanford's psychology division, and the original money for that had actually come largely for parapsychological research that had been earmarked by one of the Stanfords when the school had been set up towards the late 19th century. So it's not really kind of like well known, but from like very beginning, it was in sort of the foundation that part of the psychology stuff. Well, actually, originally it was just for parapsychology, and I think they had gotten the Stanford to change the wording slightly so they could use the funding for the psychology department. But for years, they had this one guy whose name escapes me. He had clashed with Terman, in fairness, but he was basically running this like parapsychology program concurrently with, at least in theory, Terman and him clashed, but it was concurrently with Terman's gifted program. Of course, it's certainly interesting in light, though, of at least one of Terman's particular gifted kids who you can find out about. And she certainly sired an individual with a very
I know
keen interest in metaphysics and other things. So, there's a lot to this, guys, and this kind of stuff might have been in the air for well over a century. Let's just leave it at that. But before we get too far into the weeds, Jake, you were saying about the HeartMath Institute that Barbara Marx was involved with.
Yeah, HeartMath Institute. So she promotes the HeartMath Institute in at least two books. One is Birth 2012 and Beyond. The other one is Conscious Evolution, Awakening the Power of Our Social Potential. So first, what is HeartMath, right? So HeartMath, there's a HeartMath Institute, and then there's a HeartMath Inc. So there's basically a for-profit and a non-profit branch. And they traffic in biofeedback wearables that are basically used for shifting consciousness through digitally enhanced meditation. And it's very similar to the HeartSync biofeedback wearables that I mentioned, which were promoted by Mikey Siegel, who was an advisor at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Okay, and so what exactly is a biofeedback wearable in terms of HeartMath? So, I covered them extensively in my book in terms of how they're applied for education technology, and there's a range of them. Some of them can measure EEGs, in other words, brain waves, and other metrics like galvanic skin response. But HeartMath and HeartSync, they track ECGs or EKGs, basically your heart rhythms. Okay, and so they have two particular products, Inner Balance and M-Wave. Actually, M-Wave is mentioned in my book in terms of its uses for ed tech. And basically, what you do with these things is you put the wearable on, it hooks up to an app on your phone, and then the phone gives you a reading of like where your heart rate is, the speed of it, beats per minute, etc. And then you'll be given sort of like a meditation cue. Maybe it's a song, or maybe it's like a falling rain or something to sort of help you calm. And then they give you these breathing exercises. Each of the breathing exercises has a particular name. Funny enough, they're actually trademarked. So technically, you're not supposed to even because it works on an MLM, right? It's basically multi-level marketing, which gets us back to the human potential movement, because multi-level marketing, the human potential movement are often go hand in hand, right? And so with multi-level marketing, basically what you're doing is it's basically a pyramid scheme. Okay. And so at the top of it, you have the organization, the company, or the institution that's trafficking a particular product. But the way it traffics in it is basically by training coaches or salespeople to push the products. And then those coaches or salespeople can thereby, train others to push the products. And in training them to do so, the people actually, effectively become the products themselves. And the way the human potential movement sort of fits in is that by being a part of this company or this organization, and by promoting this product and the lifestyle associated with it, you are going to reach self-actualization in a peak state, because they say, oh, you'll be an entrepreneur, you get to make your own schedule. And in the instance of some of the more new agey MLMs, like which HeartMath effectively essentially is, you're basically you're achieving your peak state or your self-actualization through these biofeedback wearables that enable you to meditate yourself into a higher state of consciousness. Okay. And that's why the meditations are trademarked, because it's part of this, this MLM pyramid scheme. Okay. And so particularly what Hubbard promotes in terms of HeartMath, in addition to just the wearables themselves, which we should note again, it's on that spectrum of sort of incremental transhumanism, right? So we start with ubiquitous mobile devices, or social media and internet that Hubbard has said is the extended nervous system. Then you move from the mobile devices and the screens to the wearables, which is what the HeartMath technologies are, and then eventually, you move to the implantables like the Neuralink brain-computer interfaces. But it's through not just through these products, but through something called the Global Coherence Initiative that Hubbard promotes HeartMath. So she specifically also promotes the Global Coherence Initiative. So what is this? GCI for short is it's basically so I just described how the wearables work. The GCI component has a separate application. So you take this app and it's hook up to your phone, but then it also links to a dashboard on, it could be a laptop, desktop, and it's going to populate a graphic of a globe with little points of light, right? Your little new age points of light. Each point of light is supposed to represent another person who is also using the device. And when you use the device and you monitor your heart rate and you do the trademarked meditation, along with, maybe again, some sort of an aid, maybe a musical aid or something. The idea is to get your heart rate into what they call heart coherence. So that's why it's called the Global Coherence.
It's a tone. I used to have it in Wave. It's a tone. There's a tone that plays. And then it goes back and forth on the M-Wave machine, and you could see it on the computer. And then when you're in coherence, it'll play more of like a ding, ding, ding type aspect when you're hitting it. You breathe in and out. You try to time your breathing with it going back and forth to your heart rate. So
so it's almost like a old school meditation bell, except that the rhythm will change based on how your breathing is syncing with it.
And when if you're in coherence or not, it'll almost reward you or train you to be in coherence.
And so the global coherence part is where basically you're going to not just get your own heart rate in coherence, but you're going to synchronize it with basically, like literally the whole planet. Okay. And in the book, Birth 2012 and Beyond, she speculates that it's either her or this woman, Claudia Wells, who is on the steering committee of the GCI. But they said that one or the other one, and it's in her book, so technically I guess it could be both, said that if you could get enough people to get into global into heart coherence together, that you could shift consciousness globally. And what I sort of surmised was that this could be a way to, the quote, the infamous quote nowadays from the World Economic Forum: "You'll own nothing and you'll be happy." You'll hang out in lockdown and be happy, right? I mean, so how can we achieve this? Or, how could you help people to be copacetic with, these radical authoritarian sort of global policies? One could be by, sort of getting people into this state of coherence, right? Because it sort of calms you down, it gets you, you know, in a sort of a peaceful state, also gets you in a suggestible state. And when I suggested that, you know, I had a lot of people that used the product that, you know, argued with me and, you know, said it's not what it's about. And, you know,
No, you're 100% right. As someone who used to use it and believe in it many years ago, and as someone who is a natural health practitioner, from a Christian perspective, yes, I don't own my M-Wave anymore, nor do I use it. So you were 100% correct.
well,
In what you're saying there.
okay, yeah, well, thanks. I you know, to double check, because, you know, I mean, I'm always open to being wrong. So you know, I looked it up, you know, because I was kind of inferring how might it be used. Well, I found it's on my Telegram. There was, so what they do is they post a global meditation. Okay, so if you got your global coherence app, and then they say this at this day at this time, you know, and you adjust it for, you know, your time zone, you know, we're all going to meditate on X or Y or Z. Well, in 2021, last year, around the time when, you know, they're starting to kind of open stuff back up, they promoted a global coherence meditation. It was called something like Patience for the New Normal. It was something for the new normal. And what they were saying was, don't get too antsy about running back out, because you have a collective responsibility not to pass COVID on to anybody else. So even though we know you,
I never knew any of this stuff. I mean, like I said, I had a friend who gave me that M-Wave machine, and I used to use it many years ago, but it seemed never really to work well with me, even when I was a new ager, and I just never seemed to. My body just didn't seem to work well with it, and I never knew that it just had so much theosophical, modern day, new age like roots with it, like. It's just blowing my mind to hear this research. I mean, I know I you know, you mentioned it in your blog, but it's just to hear it, just to think of all it and how it's used and everything. And I mean, it's a simple little machine. It's like that. It's like this big, you know, and in and of itself, if it's used away from all this stuff, I don't necessarily, it's not as, it's like when I had it, that's all I used it for. Like I was unaware of like any of this stuff. All right. So when I had it, I would just time my breathing and it would lower my heart rate. Right. But in reality, the grand maximum of all of it, you know, me being unaware of that, is all this stuff that Barbara Marx Hubbard would have, you know, believed in Institute Sciences and would have pushed forth, and, you know, all these elitist theosophists would kind of, you know, try to push upon the world, you know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I said to people who were like, well, I use it, I don't do all that other stuff. I mean, I could see, okay, like, you know, just like, you know, in terms of just basic meditation, like if you're just like trying to do some deep breathing because you're angry or you're frustrated, you're trying to, you know, you don't want to, you know, you want to calm yourself down so you could have the conversation you need to have with somebody, right? You don't want to, you know, you're in that limbic state or whatever. I mean, okay, but when, you know, when you start getting into like transcendental meditation, you're like trying to channel entities, or when you're doing this M-Wave or GCI thing and you're meditating on this global propaganda mantra, you know, which, you know, the most recent thing that I saw in the GCI was they had a global coherence meditation to meditate on the Ukraine conflict. So it seems like these global coherence meditations basically revolve around whatever is the, you know, the current propaganda angle in the you know, mainstream media. And so, you know, you're not just using it to sort of, for, you know, doing martial arts for a long time. You know, I remember people would say, you know, when I had a hard time with my cardio, they would say like, you gotta breathe more. Like, I'm like, I need to get my lungs stronger. Like, no, you just need to not be so wound up. And, you know, you can kind of, you don't need the device to know that, hey, I'm worked up right now, I need to chill. But, you know, if you don't know, if you're not sort of in tune with your body, I guess, you know, if that sort of gives you some sort of signal like, oh yeah, I'm super agitated right now, I probably shouldn't, you know, have this debate with whoever, right? You know, that's one thing. But when you're basically using it, you know, I use the term, sort of euphemistically, like sort of hypnotizing yourself to sort of synchronize with global propaganda. I mean, that's a whole nother issue. And just to sort of illustrate, how, so not only did Hubbard promote this thing, but the people who are on the GCI steering committee, several of them, Hubbard endorses as allies of her Birth 2012 campaign. So one of them is Greg Braden. Okay. And this guy was a senior computer system designer for Martin Marietta Defense Systems, which I didn't realize is now Lockheed Martin. Okay. So Lockheed and Martin Marietta were two companies that merged to create Lockheed Martin. He was also apparently a technical operations manager at Cisco. Another one of these GCI folks that Hubbard promotes her name is Jetta Mali. Another one is Howard Martin. This guy has worked for Fortune 100 companies, government agencies, U.S. military, school systems, and ecumenical organizations. Another one is Jack Canfield. He's the chicken soup for the soul guy. He's also a member of the Transformational Leadership Council, which is also promoted by Hubbard in Birth 2012 and beyond. Another one is Lynn McTaggart. Another one is Marcy Shimoff. She is also a founding member of the Transformational Leadership Council, again, promoted by Hubbard. Another one is Lynn Twist. Lynn Twist holds memberships in both the Institute of Noetic Sciences and the Transformational Leadership Council. Then you have Nina Rothschild-Utney, and she is actually a founding member of one of the Waldorf schools, which obviously has New Age roots back to Steiner. Bruce Lipton is another one. And then let's see, those people are all promoted by Hubbard and are on the GCI steering committee. But then there's a couple other people on the GCI steering committee that are not explicitly promoted by Hubbard, but they are connected to the Institute of Noetic Sciences. One of them is Dean Radin. And this guy has also done, quote, consciousness research at Princeton University. I imagine that probably connects with that pair organization that I mentioned that Rockefeller funded. He's also has worked Silicon Valley think tanks, including SRI International, has also has experience with some telecommunications R&D at AT&T Bell Laboratories. He's also worked with at Google and DARPA. And then you've got another person named Marilyn Mandela Schlitz. And she was president of research and education at Institute of Noetic Sciences. And then the most important one is a woman by the name of Claudia Wells. And Claudia Wells, she also is a member of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and she writes an entire chapter in Birth 2012 and beyond in which she promotes HeartMath. One other man I can mention on the GCI Global Coherence Initiative Scientific Advisory Board is a guy by the name of Roger Nelson, and he is a founder of the Global Consciousness Project, which came out of that Princeton Engineering Anomalies research, which was financed by Rockefeller. Nelson is also a member of the Esalen Institute Center for Theory and Research. So all the institutes, all the organizations I just mentioned, all of them have some connection or another to most of the people on the Global Coherence Initiative Steering Committee or Scientific Advisory Board, which is promoted by Hubbard.
So how about the Singularity University?
So Hubbard actually, she was interviewed there by a guy by the name of Mark Donahue. And Mark Donahue, she promotes him in, I think it's The Conscious Evolution, Awakening the Power of Our Social Potential. It was one of her books. And I believe in that speech, well, the interview, okay, they're at Singularity University, I believe that he mentions that he edited one of her books. They don't say which one. Might be the same one. And so she's interviewed by him. He's a member of Singularity University. He's chummy with Ray Kurzweil, who's one of the helped set up Singularity University. I think he's one of the co-founders. And Ray Kurzweil being chief of engineering at Google, one of the most prominent proponents of transhumanist evolution. He basically says, he literally says we're going to become gods when we merge with computer technologies. And during this interview at Singularity University, both Hubbard and Donahue promoted, quote unquote, Maslow-inspired evolutionary entrepreneurs, end quote, as agents of conscious transhuman evolution. So in other words, right, they're promoting the concept of the singularities, right, that basically is Kurzweil's idea. It comes out of his book, Singularity is Near. You can actually, I think you can trace it back to Werner Vinge in some ways, but, sort of popularized by that book, Singularity is Near by Kurzweil. And so
it was definitely Benji who was like also big in the extropian movement that Peter Thiel really got a lot of his ideology from, that popularized it. Or he was actually the one who came up, I think, with the concept of singularity originally. Just interesting side note there.
Yeah, I was foggy on that, and I'm like, wait a minute, I think it actually, and I wrote about that in my book. I'm pretty sure that's where I'm remembering it from. But this idea, the singularity, right? This idea, the point at which biology and psychology and the various biotech, psychotechnologies, internet technologies, wearables, brain, all these technologies sort of merge together into basically singularity, at which point the human being, him or herself, is going to likewise merge with all these technologies, which you can see this, in other words, as the apex or the culmination of conscious evolution, going back to this idea of the noosphere, right? So as the noosphere spawns intelligence in humans, then humans build all these technologies, and at first they're sort of disparate, separate fields of the scientific specialty, and then various arrays of different technologies that don't sort of have anything to do with each other, and eventually it all sort of comes together into this singularity, at which point we merge with it and we have our transhuman conscious evolution. And I find it interesting that that they call this a Maslow-inspired evolutionary entrepreneurs who will be the main drivers of this. So basically he suggests that well, if you're an entrepreneur and you got a company, you don't just want to work for profit, you want to work for it should be some sort of, it should help you reach your self-actualization or your peak state, and then Hubbard sort of would expand on that with instead of just self-actualization through individual human potential achievements, that collectively you have a social potential, but it all sort of stems from this idea of Maslow's humanistic / transhuman psychology, and sort of so then the entrepreneur and thereby the corporation becomes a driver of the human potential movement as sort of the psychological / spiritual engine for technological evolution, which is, as I mentioned, transhuman conscious or noetic evolution.
All right, so let's see here. Let's get into the World Future Society and Barbara Marx Hubbard. Did you have anything else on that, Jake, that you want to put in?
Yeah, just a little bit. That's something I'm looking to dig in more in the coming articles, and I'm super slow because I have a million other jobs, and so people keep asking me what's the next one to come. I'm slowly chipping away at it, but the main things that that I want to build on, and I just, some of these are sort of tangential that I think are interesting to note and pick up on, and John can probably build more on this, and maybe some of it will dovetail with what he's going to talk about. But so one of the most important things is Hubbard co-founded it, and that is stated on the back of Birth 2012 and Beyond. And then other interesting members of the World Future Society include Ray Kurzweil, Ben Goertzel, who has a connection to either Singularity Net or Singularity University or both. But he's sort of in that Kurzweil network in pushing this concept of the singularity and transhumanist evolution. Other people that are noteworthy to me are John Naisbitt. He's the guy that wrote the Megatrends book on futurism, and then another one being Maurice Strong, who's one of the early proponents of sort of this what we now know as the Sustainable Development Initiatives, and as I mentioned earlier, right, thus sort of going back to this idea of Malthusian population control, there's those people are just interesting to note, and that Hubbard sort of co-founded this organization that is a place of networking for these folk. One thing, which is one of the first reasons why the World Future Society ever really popped up on my radar, I bought the trilogy, Michael Aquino's Mind War trilogy. So it's 3 books: Mind War, Mind Star, and Find Far. And if you in Find Far, there's a section on what he refers to as resources, and Find Far, from what I've gleaned from it, is basically it's sort of how to forecast sort of predictively from the basis of mind war, right? So it's sort of strategies for the mind war forecasting. And so I guess these resources would be instruments for mind war forecasting. And one of them he has listed is the World Future Society, along with Stratfor and the CIA. And so,
all right, so John, you're up. What do you got for us, the World Future Society?
I got a lot about that. I spent a lot of time researching that. So the World Future Society was founded in 1966. The World Future Society was founded by Edward Cornish. He was the president of the World Future Society for many years. Finders operation leader Marion Petty, Charles W. Williams Jr., Peter Zuckerman, William T. Gay, Roy Mason, and Barbara Marx Hubbard. She was also a director of the World Future Society. It's quite a coincidence that Hubbard's strong spiritual vision that I mentioned earlier, for her to go and change the world, happened the same year the World Future Society was founded, which is 1966. Hubbard made 2 sizable donations to help fund the foundation of the World Future Society. The World Future Society would later receive funding by the United States National Science Foundation and the Library of Congress. Cornish has publicly discussed how crucial Hubbard's contributions were for the early survival of the World Future Society. Financial support was critical for the society because relatively few of our members contributed anything beyond their membership dues. We had no government or corporate support in the early years. Without Barbara's help, the society may have never survived its critical early years. 6 weeks after we announced the society's founding in 1966, only 3 people had signed up for membership. Hardly a promising start. But after we began distributing our brochures in the first issue of our magazine, The Futurist, people began to sign up in more significant numbers. By March 1st, 1967, the society had 340 members, along with a glowing stack of unpaid bills. And by the end of our first year, we had 1,500 members. So that was quite interesting. That had grown by that amount. World Future Society would also put out or would have a conference during the summer every year called World Future. So some people that were members of the World Future Society or speakers of the World Future Society include someone who was mentioned earlier, Abraham Maslow, former Democrat Vice President of the United States, Albert Gore Jr., Arthur C. Clarke, Ben Goertzel, who helped create the Sophia the robot and was very proud of his $100,000 grant for Jeffrey Epstein for his artificial intelligence work. B.F. Skinner, someone who's mentioned earlier, Buckminster Fuller, Carl Sagan, former United States Democrat senator who was a speaker, Edward M. Kennedy, Gene Roddenberry, who is the writer, creator, and producer of Star Trek, former United States Republican President Gerald R. Ford. Let's see here. Herman Kahn, the founder of the Hudson Institute. Isaac Asimov. John Naisbitt, was mentioned earlier. Leonard Nimoy. Malcolm Willis McConaughey, who was also known as Adam Aristotle Starchild. He was American financial consultant, author, convicted fraudster, homosexual pedophile, and New Ager. Malcolm was the supposed leader of a homosexual child pornography ring known as the North Fox Island pedophile ring. Malcolm wrote the foreword to World Future Society members Isaac Asimov's book, Worlds Within Worlds, The Story of Nuclear Energy. Margaret Mead, Maurice Strong was mentioned earlier, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Ray Bradbury, Ray Kurzweil, Stanley Kubrick, Walter Mondale, former United States Democratic Vice President, was also a World Future Society speaker. And so it's my belief that the World Future Society is an elitist, globalist, new age transhumanist think tank. And it has steered a lot of our beliefs about science and science fiction for decades through both television and books. I mean, you have Stanley Kubrick, Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, Gene Roddenberry. You have Carl Sagan. You have Neil deGrasse Tyson. So yeah, I mean, the World Future Society, was a major player of kind of what many people have talked about, what they call science TM or science trademark of the code of science that we see today. A lot of it was pushed by the World Future Society, and still is. The World Future Society still exists, still being pushed by them today. So
can I add? I thought of something when you were talking and naming people. There's a file that I got out of the many files that Charlotte gave me, and this is a photocopy from, I think it's from the Futurist. Yeah, it's from the Futurist. It's December 1986 issue. It's on page 33, and it mentions that there was a 20th anniversary celebration at what called Future Focus Society. President Edward Cornish was presented with messages of congratulations. Some of the excerpts, there's quotes here from Ronald Reagan and George Bush were there.
really?
Yeah, congratulating.
Both CNP presidents.
And then so George Bush, so it's vice president, so that's HW, but one of his sons was Neil, right? And Neil Bush funded Louis Marx Jr., who was Barbara Marx Hubbard's brother.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
We were back full circle.
All right, John. So how about Hubbard, Gorbachov, and the nuclear threat then?
All right. So this is pretty interesting. So this is something that Arturo Tafoya discussed when we had him on. Well, you had him on to discuss, and I had him on later just to talk about Barbara Marx Hubbard. So we both had him on in two separate occasions. But and it's something that I've been paying attention more to more from Mark from Houstonic Live has been kind of playing speeches from the Carnegie Institute that Gorbachev was mentioned. So, Gorbachev was kind of after the fall of the USSR, was a major pushing a lot of new age progressive beliefs. He almost became a center focal point of those ideals. And he started putting together these conferences and had his own foundation, the Gorbachev Foundation. So he put together this event called the State of the World Forum. And there at the State of the World Forum, it said that has the who's who of Wall Street, the Trilateral Commission, the World Economic Forum, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Club of Rome, Barbara Marx Hubbard was a Club of Rome member, the Bilderbergers, and the World Future Society, and other bastions of power. So in this group was Barbara Marx Hubbard, and she was giving speeches and working directly with Gorbachev to kind of push this sort of Damocles that nuclear war was going to annihilate the human race, to kind of try to push that information. I mean, even something that I discovered today, which is a tie-in to that, was a board of director of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, Jake, is George Zimmerman from the Men's Warehouse commercials. You love the suit, I guarantee it. Well, he was at Gorbachev's conference as well with Barbara Marx Hubbard and giving a speech about, New Age type beliefs. So, I mean, these people all connect or incestuous with each other. But it seems, Barbara Marx Hubbard also, let me see if I can find it. She was in her 1984 Democratic Convention speech, among pushing many blasphemous New Age ideals. She talks about the formation of kind of like a council of peace, kind of like this Department of Peace, and in it also Dennis Kucinich would later put together a bill in Congress for the formation of the Department of Peace. And Barbara Marx Hubbard was a mentor to Dennis Kucinich. But in this Department of Peace, it was kind of this, we're being threatened by a nuclear holocaust, above all, through war through a nuclear holocaust that will wipe off, wipe out humanity. So it has to be controlled, and something has to be done with it. And Gorbachev was also going to be mentioned as someone who was supposed to work with her Department of Peace. And so, Barbara Marx Hubbard, I guess one last thing, like many theosophists and New Agers in the modern era, including Alice Bailey, who worshipped atomic energy and thought it was like had godlike potential. Barbara Marx Hubbard was no different. In her book, Happy Birthday, Planet Earth, she writes a lot about how sacred atomic energy is, and how pretty much like the people that don't ascend, because she there's a famous quote that she had mentioned. It's about the elite, or the pale horse riders, that they would call 1/4 of humanity, which goes along the line with what a lot of the New Agers have spoken. That that if you don't ascend, like a Christian like me isn't going to ascend to their pantheon or whatever, I'll be ejected from the earth by the quote unquote Shambhala force. But so she writes about kind of like we're in charge of God's selection process for planet Earth. God selects, we destroy. We are the riders of the pale horse, death. We do this for the sake of the world. This act is as horrible as killing a cancer cell. It must be done for the sake of the future of the whole. So be it. Be prepared for the selection process, which is now beginning. We, the elders, have been patiently waiting until the very last moment for the quantum transformation to take action to cut out this corrupted element in the body of humanity. It's like watching a cancer grow. Something must be done before the whole body is destroyed. The destructive 1/4 must be eliminated from the social body. So she talks about, and here she goes, and this is the reason why that 1/4 has to be eliminated. If the selfish were to inherit the evolutionary capacities, early external aspects of Christ's stability, nuclear energy is the very first thing that she mentions. Biotechnology, longevity, self-replicating machines, the power to build new worlds, etc. They would self-destruct and in the process destroy the whole. So there is this element of the elite pushing, and they pushed it, throughout the 50s and the 60s with the school drills and the threat of mutual assured destruction and nuclear annihilation that would happen. They were trying to fearmonger and push this fear of the sword of Damocles of nuclear weapons. And me as a Christian, I believe objectively how the world ends, the book of Revelation, isn't by nuclear annihilation. So there's many movies that even push this theory of nuclear annihilation, a lot of them being think tanked by people in the World Future Society. So it's just quite interesting to see kind of these modern day New Agers, these elite New Agers, pushing this nuclear assured destruction talking point that you would expect to come out of a lot of secret right like think tanks, of during the Cold War. And Gorbachev, being a focal point of pushing this in the 1990s, allied with Barbara Marx Hubbard and people like John Nasbitt and Shirley MacLaine and Ted Turner and Jane Fonda and Zbigniew Brzezinski and Carl Sagan and Robert Mueller, who was co-head of the United Nations at that time, Rupert Murdoch, so everybody came together to kind of push this fear, and they still do to this day.
I might also note that another file I got from Charlotte is it's basically like a catalog. It's got some articles in it from the Esalen Institute promoting their Soviet American exchange program. This is during the time when Gorbachev was in charge of the Soviet Union. And part of this Esalen Soviet American exchange program was a guy by the name of Stephen Rhinesmith, who was also CFR. And he might even set up the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders program. I'm looking at my database and I don't have extensive notes here, but he's connected to the WEF's Young Global Leaders program. So, you sort of have a interesting nexus here of, again, Esalen, the Soviets during a time when Gorbachev was in charge, and also the CFR and WEF.
Yeah, I mean the Russians are really the key to like all of this, but probably not in the way that people think. But that's something I'm going to explore in my book. But anyway, let's see here. So, John, what about the status of Barbara Marx Hubbard in the modern day truth movement?
So this was something that Arturo Tafoya covered extensively as well. So Barbara Marx Hubbard started appearing a lot, at least especially towards 2012, where they were trying to push that New Age Mayan prophecy, the 2012, the coming calling. She would appear frequently on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie many times. And she would also she appeared in this New Age truther movie, Thrive, What on Earth Will It Take, which was put forth by one of the heir who supposedly denied his heir, the Procter and Gamble fortune, Foster Gamble. So in this movie, other people that appeared was David Icke, Alex Jones, John Perkins, Confession of Economic Hitman, Catherine Austin Fitts, G. Edward Griffin, who's a long-term John Birch Society member, Stephen Greer, Amy Goodman from Democracy Now!, Van Jones, Deepak Chopra, who Jake mentioned earlier, who said, like Jake said, Hubbard is the voice of conscious evolution of our time. Edgar Mitchell, who was a co-founder of the Institute of Poetic Sciences, and Stefan Molyneux. Now, some people did go back and they were like, once they realized, what type of documentary that they were in. I think Amy Goodman was one of them. Kind of went back and was like, hey, I'm not for this. I'm not for Foster Gamble. I'm not for Thrive or whatever. But you would think, some of the truthers, right? Truthers like David Icke, Alex Jones, because CMP Alex Jones, G. Edward Griffin, Catherine Austin Fitts. You think, since they realized that they were in a documentary with Hubbard, like they'd watched the documentary after they were in it, right? They would have gone back, would have been like, wait a minute, I wouldn't have nothing to do with this. Well, none of them did. None of them denied, or none of them were, kind of look back and said this was a mistake that I was ever in, Thrive. I mean, Alex Jones has had Foster Gamble on quite a few times to espouse his New Age beliefs. So it's a lot of the alternative media, from more of a controlled standpoint, has had Barbara Marx Hubbard on to push her New Age transhumanist theosophical beliefs to their audience. It's actually quite sad, but I mean, again, what do you expect? It should be par for the course for these people.
Interestingly, you just touched on something else. So in Birth 2012 and Beyond, Barbara Marx Hubbard promotes the Transformational Leadership Council, as I mentioned earlier. And so she's got a list of members of the Transformational Leadership Council, who she says many of which are, quote, closely collaborating with the Birth 2012 campaign. One of those folks happens to be John Perkins. John Perkins is also a board member of something called the Pachamama Alliance. So if you remember the whole thing with, the Vatican and that Pachamama statue sort of pushing this sort of new age world religion, replacing the Virgin Mary with the Pachamama. And then the Pachamama Alliance is actually also promoted as an affiliate, one of the Shift Network allies in Birth 2012 and Beyond.
Well, that doesn't surprise me about Perkins, because Perkins seems to be playing a major role in the Great Awakening, the phony New Age Great Awakening, versus the Great Reset type narrative, where they see a lot of people pushing Perkins work to this day to try to push forth villainization of the old world order, which is deserved, don't get me wrong, but they're kind of doing it in a disingenuous way, because they're like, oh, look how bad, all these people are, but leave out, the Great Awakening side, which seems to be more CMP, John Birch Society aligned, at least on the appearances. So yeah, I mean, that would make Perkins to be highly suspect at this point, in my opinion.
All right, to wrap up, let's get into some of the really juicy stuff here. So, John, tell us about the ties you found between Barbara Marx Hubbard and the Finders.
A lot. A lot. So, okay. So, like I mentioned earlier, Marion Petty was a founding member with Barbara Marx Hubbard, the World Future Society. Um, Marion Petty supposedly said this when discussing the World Future Society. Toby Terrell's book, The Game Caller. So Marion Petty allegedly stated to Finders Operation member Toby Terrell that most people sadly tried to raise their consciousness individually and not within a group. Petty continued to say that the World Future Society was an exemplary community group of like-minded individuals that would serve as a model for people who want to raise their consciousness and live a highly principled life. Petty allegedly told Terrell that during the 1970s, he had known Ed and Sally Cornish for at least 20 years and that they were not bad people. They were okay. Petty supposedly mentions to Terrell some of the flaws of the World Future Society. Petty says that the people who join the World Future Society are controlling and emotional cripples. They want to avoid the future because they're afraid of it. Finally, Petty also states that the World Future Society members are not transparent with each other. There are many. Okay, so that was one thing that Petty mentioned about the World Future Society of itself. So, the Committee for the Future, which was another one of Barbara Marx Hubbard's organizations, staged SynCons, which were these synergistic convergences. Toby Terrell supposedly helped Barbara Marx Hubbard stage a SynCon in Boston, Massachusetts in 1975. So Finders Operation member Toby Terrell stated that SynCon stood for synergistic convergences. Terrell mentioned that members of the Finders Operation attended the first SynCon at the Washington, D.C. Hilton, and they stored the plywood SynCon props on the second floor of the Finders Operation Washington, D.C. warehouse. The props were effectively plywood barriers used to form a giant circle where the SynCon would take place. Inside the huge circle were more plywood barriers forming pie-shaped wedges. Each wedge supposedly represented a category of human knowledge. SynCons would last for 3 days. Experts from their respective fields would meet inside the wedge of their knowledge base and attempt to agree on what to do about the most crucial problems within their field. When they believed they've reached a solution, their barrier would be removed, and they would start to help solve the problems of other wedges until all the barriers are finally removed. And you're left with a full circle instead of a divided up pie. And everyone within the giant circle begins to tackle the supposed most critical worldwide problems. The timing of the barrier removal is determined by Barbara Marx Hubbard and her principal assistant, World Future Society member Jerry Glenn. A SynCon was allegedly considered a win when people came to agreements to solve the supposed problems of the world, but Terrell mentioned there was rarely any follow-up or follow-through, so the world's problems remained. And also, investigative journalist Charles Soka wrote about his dealings with Barbara Marx Hubbard, the World Future Society, and the Finders Operation. In his blog, he stated, I first met the group at Finders in 1972 while serving as a student representative of the board of directors of Mensa University, a university for gifted students. The Mensa University project was a dismal failure. Prior to that time, I'd been unaware of how incredibly weird people's supposed high intelligence could be and unusually are. I became a regular attendee of Finders' weekly meetings where open forums on whatever was on your mind. So recall nothing productive ever came from the sessions, but I met a number of interesting and flaky people. I met Roy First, the first ambassador to outer space. Not a joke. The UN passed a resolution recognizing a special interest group on outer space, and Mr. First was chosen by whomever to serve as an ambassador to outer space. I met Mildred Loomis from the School of Living, a celebrated back to the launder from Vermont, which is, Mildred Loomis has numerous connections to Finders as well. I met Sam Love from Futuremics Incorporated, which published a magazine entitled Future Economics. I also met Roy Mason, housing editor for the World Future Society magazine, The Futurist. He was also a founding member of the World Future Society. I visited with Barbara Marx Hubbard, currently a popular New Age author, at her mansion in Washington, where the Futurists held their ongoing series of meetings and seminars. I met a great number of interesting and exciting people. The Finders Operation was a magnet for New Agers, and not by accident. As I said, the apartment building had been turned into a flop house for free thinkers, attracting a great number of young travelers of a business in Washington who were too poor to afford regular accommodations. Zachary described the W Street apartment building as a hub of counterculture activity. So the Finder Operation members attended a World Future Society meeting in 1979. In the summer of 1979, the Finders Operation members drove to Toronto, Canada for the World Future Society meeting where the theme was to think globally, act locally. The Finders Operation members behind the scenes set up the World Future Society conference. The members set up tables, provided audiovisual equipment, set up the conference props, and answered attendees' queries, handed out the meeting itineraries, and directed conference attendees where to go for the meetings. Finders Operation member clinical psychologist Steve Belts lined up a contract with the World Future Society to provide logistical support for the conference. Fighters Operation member Toby Terrell mentions that the running of the World Future Society conference was a success for Belts and the start of a new business firm managing conferences. Now, after the Tallahassee incident in 1987, the raids of the Fighters Operation cabins outside of Etland, Virginia, which was also in the Free State near Culpeper, Virginia, from a Washington Post article. The door of one cabin was opened yesterday, revealing large amounts of food, clothing, sleeping bags, books, and pamphlets from groups such as the World Future Society. So there are numerous connections between Barbara Marx Hubbard and the World Future Society. Hopefully I'll be able to find more and flesh out more. There's also a Google Groups post, actually two things. One, the infamous investigative leads memo mentions Marion Petty, the World Future Society. In 1967 or 1968, Petty established a futurist network assisting Edward S. Cornish in founding the World Future Society, working through Roy Mason and John Nesbitt. And then there was a Google Groups post on February 5th, 1995, discussing the Fighters Operation connections to the World Future Society. It mentions Edward Cornish being a Fighters member, and Marion Petty is also a member of the World Future Society. So, yes, Marion Petty worked directly with Barbara Marx Hubbard, Edward Cornish, and was a founding member of the World Future Society.
Good stuff there, John. All right. Well, Kista, does anybody else have anything else to add here before we sign off? All right, then. Well, it has been a good examination as always with you, Mr. Brisson. I thank you again for joining us as well, Jake. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. And as always, Barbara Marx Hubbard remains an enigmatic topic and one that deserves certainly far more attention than she's gotten in a critical fashion in recent years. But hopefully some of these podcasts will shed some more light on it. And as I said before, I'm going to have some very interesting stuff about her for my forthcoming books as well. So yeah, hopefully there will be some new perspectives out there about this curious individual. On the net, we shall sign off for now. As always, I thank you guys very much for listening, and good night and good luck to you all.